But in this half hour, we're going to be talking about comic books. Now, when I was a kid, it was considered kid stuff or a medium that really appealed to a small fringe. But no more. Of course, Marvel Comics has spawned Marvel Studios, and it's owned the box office over the last decade with 19 superhero movies, huge ones. They've affected the whole culture. Iron Man, Thor, Captain America, Black Panther, and now Avengers Infinity War. Comic books are read now by people of all ages and have been for quite a while. They're a cultural force. None of this is news to my next guest. Jim Zub is part of the comic book world. He's the coordinator of the animation program at Toronto Seneca College. He's also a writer who's published a number of his own comic series, and he writes for the giant Marvel Comics. In fact, he's one of 3 international writers who were chosen to create the latest Avengers storyline, No Surrender. And Jim Zub is here with me this morning. Hi, Jim.
Morning. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Thanks for coming in.
My pleasure.
So I use the term comics. Some people say graphic novels. Which do you prefer?
I just say comics.
Is there a difference?
I mean, I guess it's more like a casual kind of speech for it. It's a medium, so comics. Graphic novels tend to be just a specific kind of format where you're delivering a novel-length story in one book, if you wanted to get really particular. But it's pretty flexible in that regard, in the same way that, if people say Coke, they might just mean a cola. Comics are comics. It just covers the whole kind of broad thing, and graphic novels is a specific format.
Okay, I get that. Where did your passion for comic books start?
I grew up as a really avid comic reader. I've sort of gone through phases of comic reading. Obviously, when I was a kid, they were kind of all around me, and newspaper strips and things like that. But I really got obsessed with the Marvel comics. When I was probably 7 or 8 years old.
Wow, that's good reading skills for a 7 or 8 year old.
Yeah, I was pretty obsessed. And what was amazing about those books, and still is to this day, I think a lot of the writers, particularly Stan Lee, but some of the other ones like Roger Stern and Roy Thomas, they wouldn't talk down to kids in the books. They would use big words, and rather than me being scared off of it, I would go grab a dictionary and look them up, and then horribly pronounce them until someone corrected me, because I wanted to incorporate them into my language all the time, because I was like, oh, that's a big fancy word.
Your parents must have been very happy. Seeing the kid read comics might have made them nervous at first, but as soon as you reach for the dictionary, they must have thought, yes, there you go.
Yeah, I think they were sort of surprised. I mean, they're shocked now because my life sort of revolves around all this pop culture stuff. But at the time, I think they went through phases where they're like, geez, I hope he does more real book reading. And I did. I read novels. I was pretty obsessed with sword and sorcery stuff, but comics really had me something deep. It was crazy.
Okay, so this is when you're 7 or 8, the passion hits. What held your interest? Why, as you got older, did this medium still stick for you?
I think what's great about comics is that although people may know one aspect of it, if they've just read Archie or they see a Garfield strip or, the superhero stuff, they assume, okay, that's what comics are. But they're a medium. And so as I was getting older, the types of comics I was reading were changing. There were more options in the industry, and I started to notice them. So there were publishers or even imprints within publishers that were more oriented towards kind of, my teenage mind or the kind of subject matter that was really grabbing me. And that's what's one of the things that's great about comics as kind of a broad medium. There's so many different titles.
Right. One of them won a Pulitzer Prize, right? Mouse in the early 90s.
Yeah. And I think people are surprised when you realize you can dig kind of deeper into this subject matter and kind of portray something really emotional in this graphic format, that the interplay of kind of words and pictures are not childish. In many ways, it's very complicated. Your brain's kind of operating on both levels and you're getting so much information, and comics can be incredibly deep.
I want to get to that in a second. I just want to know what the turning point for you was when you went from reader, fan, passionate fan, collector, all the things that happens to people along the route of being a comic book lover, to when you said, yeah, I can do this for a living. What was the thing that changed the...
At first, I actually didn't think I could do it. It seemed like the publishing industry was so... particularly for superhero comics, it was a vortex all around New York City, and I didn't know how to get a book published or how to put a proposal together. I moved into animation because I looked at sort of the credits of films and I thought, okay, there's hundreds of people there. I could be one of those hundreds of people scrolling by. That doesn't seem out of reach. The 3 people on the cover of a book or something like that on a comic, that seemed too lofty kind of a goal. I was really intimidated by it. So I started in animation, have a lot of passion for hand-drawn animation in particular, worked in that industry for a while, did some storyboarding, did some background art and character animation, and then realized that, one of the good things about being in animation is there were a lot of jobs, but I was also one big part of a huge creative machine. I didn't necessarily have a lot of say, particularly at that point in my career, in terms of what happens, And so in the evenings...
you mean story. What happens in the story, yeah.
Exactly. So in the evening, I would start making my own comic, because making your own animated film is a crazy, arduous process. It's doable and easier now with the technology, but I started working on a comic because it was a way for me to get a story down and really start to see it. This is like 2000, 2001, and started posting them online and built really kind of my... lexicon for like how this stuff works through trial and error. And that weird thing with the internet where you're putting it up and people are responding to it and you're learning as you go, which is pretty amazing and scary.
And then ultimately you went on to create your own material and work for Marvel.
Yeah.
Let's do a comic book 101. So you've created your own series. You've written for Marvel.
Yeah.
Do you also, when you create a series as a writer, do you have to be able to draw?
No, but I think it helps to have a visual sensibility. This is a visual medium, and so it's really crucial to be able to look and go, okay, what are the visual waypoints that we're trying to deliver here? This isn't prose. There's a text component usually, although there are silent comics, like if we wanted to get, picky, but the visuals are always going to be there in some way, shape, or form. So what are we trying to show to this audience? What are we trying to deliver on the page? And so having a visual understanding is really important. Having an art background has been very advantageous to me, because when I'm collaborating with an artist, we're talking the same language, or when we're bouncing ideas back and forth. Worst case scenario, I can thumbnail something out and send it over email to them. And so it just gives you more tools in the toolbox.
Right.
And it makes you think differently about the page.
Okay. So what is your role as a writer? Like, you've created, we'll talk again Marvel later, but for your own projects, then you come up with storyline.
Right.
And then are you like a project manager after that?
It's sort of. It depends on, everything's a little bit different. Some publishers have editors that are very intimately involved with the stories. Some of them are very hands-off. My creator-owned stuff, as we call it, creator-owned comics, are published by Image, the same guys that do The Walking Dead. And so the series I'm doing right now is called Wayward. And in that case, we brought them an entire proposal. So I had the artist he's really my co-creator. We're working together as a team. We developed it from the ground up together. And we pitched it both in terms of the character visuals and the overall style and look, along with a storyline, to the publisher. So we've really brought the complete package, and they're basically saying, yes, we like it, we want to publish it. Sometimes they might give a little bit of feedback. It's usually more in terms of marketing. Oh, this is how, this logo would work better, or maybe this will pop more on the stands. But as far as the actual book itself, it's us. It's Stephen Cummings, the artist, and I, developing this thing from the ground up.
And then what do you two talk about? Like, how do you tell? You've got a story, say it's Mary goes to the store and comes home married to falls in love with someone.
Sure.
Something simple. So what then are the considerations that the two of you discuss?
So I write like a full script. I mean, I'll usually do an outline and I send it to Stephen, and we jump on Skype and we'll talk about the possibilities. And then I'll put together a full script so it nails down, this is on this page, these are the visuals, these are the elements, this is the dialogue. And then Stephen will thumbnail some of that stuff out. Sometimes we'll jump back on the phone and he'll say, oh, I think we could tell it a little bit differently, or I might add another panel here, or what if we switched it up this way, until we're all happy with it. And then he starts the illustration process on it.
So you also work for Marvel, which is established, and you're working with the Avengers, which is not just established in the comic book world for like 30 years or more, but now this is this whole other life in the world of movies. So people are coming to the comic books from the movies. In other words, you're working in something that's well known.
Right.
So how is it different then, or is it different when you write for Marvel?
It's massive. Marvel Comics has been around in various forms, since the 60s. If you want to look at kind of the Marvel universe and the superheroes that we know and love, they were around before that. But really what people think of as the Marvel universe is the 60s. And those storylines have carried onward. The Avengers have been around since then. There are hundreds and hundreds of issues. My first issue of the Avengers was number 675, you know? and so it's an incredible legacy to be a part of. You know, there's maybe, I don't know, 30 people who have written the Avengers before, maybe definitely less than 50. And so to be in that kind of club is kind of amazing, but you're playing in this huge creative sandbox and you have all these characters and storylines and you want to inject some of yourself and your values and your ideas into it, but you're also carrying forward this torch that has, you know, been lit before you. And so it's a strange balancing act. I really love it. Like, I like playing in the creative sandbox because you're not coming in cold. You don't have a blank page. You're able to go, look, you know, that old storyline or that old villain or these old ideas, we can look at them through a new lens, or we can reinvigorate them with new ideas. And that's one of the cool things about that cross-pollination of the Marvel Universe. These characters, thousands of characters, have interacted in hundreds of thousands of ways over the years. And when you pull these pieces out and you jam them together, you find new combinations and new elements that really reflect the time we live in. You know, when you read the books from the 60s, Stan Lee and those guys, they're reflecting the world outside their window. And we're trying to do that now and keep these characters relevant.
It's so interesting. It sounds like you're making simply it makes sense, but when you actually then think, well, how would I do that?
Sure.
Your head could explode.
It's pretty wild. It can be pretty overwhelming at times. One of the things you need to do is sort of narrow your focus. You have to say, okay, what is the theme of this story, or what are we trying to say? So in No Surrender, which was this huge weekly storyline that we did leading up to the release of the Infinity War movie. I mean, the two stories are not related, but the comics were coming out at the same time leading up to the movie. We looked at this big idea of legacy. So we wanted to say, you know, the book has been around for all this time. What does it mean to be an Avenger? What does it mean to be someone who bands with other people to fight the big fights that you cannot fight alone? And what does it mean, you know, in all those different... how can we look at that from different angles? So there's a character in the series named Lightning, and he was on the team previously, and he didn't really have a big role. He wasn't very popular, and he got moved off the team, and he gets to come back because things are so dire, they're calling anyone from the reserves, and he feels like he's getting a second chance to prove himself, to really change his legacy, right? There's also a thing we did in the story where we had a character appear in the history of the Avengers who had never been there before. And immediately all the readers recognize, wait a minute, that you're showing flashbacks of old scenes. We have the books. Who's this new character that you've introduced? And so part of it was a villain who had been manipulating history. And so we got to play with the idea of legacy, you know, viewing it through kind of a false lens. Like, that's not what you remember, but someone has toyed with, you know, the legacy of the Avengers. And so how many different ways can we take this bigger, broader theme and sort of break it down and surprise readers? You know?
It goes deep.
Yeah.
And, you know, the other thing is, one of the things that surprises me as a fan of the movies is how emotional they are. And then I go back to the comic books and remember they were emotional. I think it seems to me that comic books lend themselves to deep emotions, which is surprising.
They've got inherent, you know, heightened drama, but that's more of superhero stories. I mean, you can have really quiet comic book stories. Again, like, comics are a medium, so you don't want to say all comic books are like superheroes, or all comic books are a particular heightened emotional content. But I think that in particular, the superhero stuff is like, it's like a modern mythology. You've got these massive characters on a mythic scale. They're idealized, you know, they have heightened abilities. Same as the Greek gods, they're going on these epic quests and adventures, and they're falling in love, and they have great anger and great passion, and hopefully teach us things about ourselves. When you blow out these ideas to this larger format and you're able to delve into these bigger ideals, there's a way for us to see ourselves in those characters. You know, we are projected into them. When you go to a comic book convention and there are hundreds of people dressing up as these characters, because something in that character, they want to exemplify that in themselves.
Right.
Someone wants to be Captain America. You know, someone wants to be Black Panther. Someone wants to be the Scarlet Witch because they see themselves or an idealized version of who they wish to be.
Fascinating, Jim. Thank you so much.
No problem.
Pleasure talking to you. Jim Zub is a Toronto-based comic book writer who writes both original material and also for Marvel. His latest for Marvel is Champions, and of course, the Avengers No Surrender collection, and the whole collection is coming out at the end of June. He's also the coordinator of the animation program at Toronto's Seneca College. And if you've always wanted to write your own comics, you just want to read more about the process of writing them, Jim has a series of articles and more on his website, and he also teaches through Patreon that program. So for more information on that, just look for the link at our Facebook page, CBC Fresh Air.